Part A of our presentation considers key aspects of the prison and community settings that shaped the impact of the programmes and the critical role of the programme facilitators. Part B focuses on the subject of endings and how endings are handled. So just to think a little bit about how the setting influences the running of the programme, shapes the impact that it has. Within the prison settings, where the majority of the programmes within the Inspiring Futures ran, it was evident that actually the institutional element of the prison was integral to the impact of the arts programmes. So very much central to understanding what was going on. And there were a number of different strands, if you like, of that impact that played a role. The first was communication between staff members in the setting and the arts organisation that was running. And we found that where there was consistency of communication, that enabled the programmes to run much more smoothly, and therefore participants and facilitators were able to concentrate on the content rather than anything else. We also found that prisons which managed to minimise the delays and disruptions to the routine, to the programmes, were also able to facilitate or maximise the potential of impact. So we found that there were sometimes prison-specific delays or disruptions, so where other aspects of life came in, such as calls to family, visits to healthcare. If these were timetabled at the same time as the arts programme, then a participant would miss a session in order to go off and do that. But there were also arts project-specific issues. So, for example, when there were mix-up in communications, which meant that escorts were not brought to bring the facilitators into the prison, or where participants were not unlocked in time to get to the course for when it began, or there was a lack of available space that enabled the project to run. So these all could play a role in just affecting the way in which the programme was run. We also noticed, and we've touched on this topic a little bit before, a range in what we've called institutional buy-in. So there were differences in the level of engagement from prison staff, both managerial and frontline. And this varied according to the levels of encouragement that were there, the extent to which staff attended or took part in performances, and in the running of sort of administrative tasks too. And just to give you a sort of an indication or one example, there was one drama performance in a prison where nobody from the prison staff came to watch. And although this was very much a performance for the participants to share with each other and with the facilitators, there was also a hope that the message that they had put together in their drama pieces would be communicated to the wider prison. In fact, one person did turn up from the prison, but that was by mistake because they thought that they'd come to a meeting and hadn't realised that there was the performance. And to give that person, their due credit, when they realised the disappointment that was evident in the participants' responses, they set up a second performance for those other prison staff to come along. But I think it just illustrated how powerful a message it could be of support if people were taking part. We saw a variety of levels of engagement. So there isn't an assumption that actually it is necessarily needed or good for prison staff or other staff to take part in the programme. That can vary. But where things worked better was when even if staff weren't involved, there was a sense of interest and an awareness of what was going on. Walkie-talkies were turned off or turned down, a sensitivity to the experience that was taking place within that setting. Within the community, and we had one organisation, Only Connect, which ran programmes in the community. So we want to make it clear that these observations are really from the one programme, and there may be variation depending on different settings. And those of you who run programmes in the community may sort of reflect on these points and consider how relevant they are to your experiences too. But we also were aware that there were delays and disruptions. COVID played a huge role, both within the prisons and in the community. But in comparison to the prison settings, the course leader within the community organisation had greater flexibility to reorganise, to reshift, to work within social distancing arrangements, for example. So there was a greater level of flexibility in the delivery of the programmes. What was also interesting was that with this Only Connect programme, the participants spoke of Only Connect as an organisation. So there was a sense of identity and affiliation with the organisation itself, which we didn't see so much voiced by those within the prison settings. So Only Connect and the base that it had in London was a place that they saw as a place of safety, that they came to see as part of their community and their support network. So as a sense of the organisation and of belonging to the organisation, which was particularly strong amongst those participants within the community organisation. We also saw that communication was very important. Interestingly, online contact was very much the mode of interaction in and around the courses when they took place. And that was between the facilitator and the participants, but also with sort of groups, chat groups amongst participants themselves. And that brought with it its own dynamic of interaction, so slightly more fragmented geographically, but in terms of regularity or spontaneity, there was more opportunity for that type of communication. And finally, we saw that the organisation Only Connect within the community had a broader community reach than the prisons necessarily were able to achieve. So it meant the participants' work, when it was performed, reached a more diverse audience in terms of who was invited to the performance, the showcasing events. But there were also opportunities and encouragement for participants who wrote songs to put those on online platforms. And so the potential reach for their creative output was wider than for those in the prison settings. The second dimension of sort of this element of thinking about mechanisms that facilitated impact, and we've talked about this before today, but the critical role of the programme facilitators. And we want to highlight two particular dimensions which we've already touched on, but are really central to the ways in which these programmes have, or we feel have, the impact that they do. And so the relationship with a programme facilitator as somebody who is from the outside, who in a way comes as an ordinary person with particular skills from society and gives people have an opportunity to meet and talk and learn from them. So this idea of being a regular person, of being a human being, that humanity and humanness in the interaction was really important. But also was an awareness of the artistic and pedagogical expertise. So the capacity of the facilitators to create an environment that felt safe for participants to take part, to share some of their most personal feelings and views. That was something that participants recognised and found to be really important. The other aspect of it was the notion of we've talked about this, the skill that the artist brings, the opportunity to talk to someone who knows, who is skilled in that capacity, particularly in the music, the music programs, where people could learn more in terms of their technical skills and develop those and think about how they might then use those to create their own music. So this, again, this sort of second quote gives an indication that actually the interaction with the expert was something that was really important. So I shall hand over now to Sarah, who's going to talk a little bit about endings.
Is that good? Great, thanks, Caroline. So yeah, one of the things that we found just came up consistently in what participants said and in our observational data was the ends of projects, the ends of each session, the ends of a project, and what happened in the immediate aftermath after the project finished. So from this, we're using data from observations from the participant diaries that we had participants fill in if they wanted to, and from our interviews. And all of these areas show how significant this concept of endings were to participants. And so to start with, talking about just the ends of an individual session, so not necessarily the end of a whole project, but just the end of a session. And this is particularly in prisons, but also in the community. It's not as significant in the data, but clearly for some participants, there was this real sense of come down after the elation of the time that they'd spent in the project, which could be quite difficult. So one diary entry from Music in Prisons, they say, "I'm always wanting to be in the music class and not be sent back to my cell. I'm always looking forward to coming back." So it becomes this quite all-encompassing experience and this real kind of come down going back to the cell afterwards. And this was, of course, in part because it is fun and different, and it provides that escape from regular life. And this was true for those in the community as well, that this place of safety, leaving at the end of the session, meant going back to their regular life. And so it's important to think about the consequences of returning to a sort of more grey life that has been made more colourful for that time. And so we found that several of the partners, and particularly those whose content involved some quite deep personal reflection, worked very hard to ensure that each session ended with some kind of closure. So this often took the form of a group debrief and a check-in at the end of a session, but maybe trying to end the session on a lighter note in order to not send people back to a potentially hostile environment while still feeling quite vulnerable, and that closure was really important. It's also worth noting that these endings were not always negative. People also reported going back to normality, feeling happy, inspired, excited, tired in a good way. So one music participant said in their diary, "Today was another good day. When I get back to the cell, I was listening to music and find the bars. I love it. It put a smile on my face." So although it can be difficult to return after a session, those creative activities can also provide new ways of coping and thriving even in those environments, and so that can really make a difference. And so then the far more salient ending was the ending of a project as a whole. And the diary entries show that this project, the prospect of the project coming to an end, factored into how participants reflected on their experience throughout the whole of the course. So this participant on day 3 of a 2-week course wrote, "The course is going to last 2 weeks. Already I'm sad about this." I should say, I have interpreted this as it's only going to last 2 weeks, and I'm sad about it. We can discuss if you decide that you think it means something different. Yeah, I think contextually I can be fairly clear that that's what it meant. But in an effort to be, very true to what's actually been said, you never know. And so frequently, as the projects came to an end, people reflected with sadness about this. So tomorrow will be the last day, shame, but things come to an end. So they know this, it's an inevitability. And someone else said, "Oh, well, I wish we had more time, I'm really getting into it." So the sense of, I've just started to know what I'm doing, and now it's coming to an end. And so the intensive kind of 1 week or 2 week project seemed to kind of induce the same kind of emotional responses that people have sometimes coming to the end of a holiday. So the sense of gladness that it happened, but sadness that it's ending. But I would say that something we've sort of seen a little bit of is how the projects that had been more sort of once weekly over a longer period of time in prisons or in the community sort of brought about a slightly different response because the project had become a part of the regular rhythm of life. Maybe their weekly routine or their sort of bi-weekly routine. So this is from a Helix Arts participant diary. He said, "Well, not long till it's over, what to do on Tuesday afternoon." So the sense of it is now going to be blank space that before was filled. Perhaps some fear that there's going to be a real emptiness during that time and they're not really sure how they're going to fill it. One participant used some very vivid imagery in her interview to describe how it feels at the end. I asked, "How are you feeling now it's ended?" And she said, This is what it feels like for us at the end of something. It's massive for us. We're teetering on the edge, arms flailing. Will we fall, or will there be a bridge to get us across? And I think this brings up two considerations: ending a project well, and having some kind of follow-up and follow-on. So many of the projects ended with some kind of performance or sharing, if that's a sort of less fearful term than performing for participants. So this was often a bit nerve-wracking, completely fear-inducing sometimes for participants, but also gave an important sense of achievement and a sense of closure, that there'd been an aim and this had been realised. And that could be a very sort of organised performance, or it could just be a sort of a time of reflection and sharing together what had happened. But this sense of something has been completed and done during this time. Participants valued being given certificates or receiving recordings of work they produced, having their achievements celebrated. The sense of they've worked towards something and they've achieved the goal that they've set out, and this really brought a conclusion. However, when these elements didn't go well, it could cause issues, and as Caroline has alluded to, there were instances where, for one reason or another, it just didn't quite go as planned. So we were aware of this, the project in question, sort of the response of the participants who felt that this performance hadn't been everything they hoped it could be. It sort of affected how they were reflecting on the project and what it had meant to them and what they could do about that. We were also painfully aware sometimes of how much our own research methods could get in the way of a good ending. And this is perhaps something for discussion later in the panel. But when we conducted these end-of-project questionnaires immediately after this wonderful performance or sharing had taken place, participants obviously commented that this was a real downer. You ask them, we were like, what's been one of the hardest parts? And they'll say, this is the worst bit right now. And so there is an element of having to navigate that sense of, we have to do this. Some element of feedback is really important, but also we recognise that this isn't the ideal way that a project might end if we didn't have to do any of these sorts of activities, and sort of navigating that tension was certainly part of our discussion. So whether it's the organisational or sort of research from us, there's a kind of tension between that necessary paperwork and harnessing that sense of closure and celebration. And so then we also noticed differences in the follow-up and what next steps were available to participants. So in terms of follow-up, some prison staff and partner organisations did put work into ensuring that someone checked in with participants in the few days after the end of the course. And this was important, particularly where there had been this real sense of elation, followed by a potential come down, often over a weekend, which can be quite a difficult time anyway in the aftermath. This shift could be quite depressing, quite difficult for some participants. Participants would eagerly await their recording or their artistic product if that was something that they expected, and so any delays to this could also be difficult. And of course that can happen for any number of reasons, and people understand it, but experientially for participants, it could be difficult, and having someone sort of checking in with them and knowing what was going on and when was important. There was also a question of whether or not there was anything available to participants to build on the work that they had done during the course. So for some, that included a desire for more permanent creative opportunities, regular instrumental lessons, a drama society or a band that they could go to weekly, an art class, so on. For others, it was about having opportunities and challenges that they could turn to, that would be new and would move them forward in their progression. A common finding in evaluations of arts projects is that these creative projects can inspire and encourage further involvement in education or other personal development courses. But this, of course, has to be paired with available and accessible courses that participants can enrol on, which is just not always how things work in practice. And I think that has to be recognised. Some participants pointed out that they would love to be able to build on what they had learned, but there was just nothing else new for them to do. Either they felt they'd done everything on offer within the prison or done everything that the probation had provided for them, or there was just a scarcity of activities in the community in the prison. And there was evidence that some were engaging much more with education, and actually the Lullaby Project was one of those, which Z might comment on later. I'm not sure what he's going to say, but in other instances, the limitations of prison life or the lack of access to anything in the community was a barrier to their continued progress. And this affected how participants reflected on the course and evaluated the impact that it had had on their lives. So having nothing to help them build on the personal and social development that had taken place could sort of curtail the impact of the programme, whereas having clear and exciting next steps brought home how beneficial the programme had been. And I think this is highlighted in these two quotes, both of these participants were from the Only Connect course in the community. So one says, personal development, here's the thing, when I'm here at the Only Connect space, it feels like I can achieve a lot. But as soon as I'm out, I'm on the bus, I get home, it's like what I've come from, it's just gone. It's gone. And then another participant says, during the course I felt really positive, but after the course I felt even more positive because even though it was done, I had my next step. And this was someone who the Only Connect producer had written a reference for to get onto a college course to continue studying. And so he had his next step, and that for him sort of highlighted how beneficial the course had been. Not having that just affected the reflections. And so we found that the impact of arts courses can be sort of enhanced or limited by how they end and what happens afterwards, and the extent to which participants feel they're able to build on their personal progress. So I'm going to leave it there and hand over to either Z or Leo. I'm not sure who wants to go first.
Good afternoon, everyone. For me, it's just become really clear today that messages or programs can easily become diluted depending on how committed prisons are. We had a very interesting discussion this morning around how certain prisons can be quite difficult places to work in because prisons can be quite complex places, and I think that links nicely to how I can contribute in what I've done, especially to enable the Lullaby project. I come from a background where I was a teacher, and often I saw ideas and suggestions made by me being shut down, and that was quite frustrating. And now I'm in a position where I can actually make decisions that influence change, and I can listen to ideas, and I can enable these ideas. And looking at what we discussed this morning, talking about complexities and bureaucracies and tick boxes and payment systems, I actually feel inspired and excited about dealing with all that side of things. And I make sure I get rid of all of that, and then I create that enabling environment for artists or any subject specialists to come in and then do their thing. And then from there we can start to influence change. We're talking about arts here, which is something I call enrichment activities, but in my role I look at curriculum prison-wide, and it's not just to do with arts, but everything. It could be English, it could be maths, it could be vocational training, all sorts of potential opportunities for prisoners. So I get rid of the bureaucracy, and I know how painful that is, so I take all that pressure, and then I allow the specialists to do their jobs and support prisoners. And basically that's what I see myself doing, and I quite enjoy doing that. So I have recently heard from someone inspiring that said that behavior is a choice, not a skill set. So please consider this for a second. I'm not suggesting that I believe in that, but just please consider that. And I would take it further and say that behaviors and attitudes are a choice, not a skill set. In our roles are empowering and support prisoners to engage in sometimes life-changing activities. And we hope that these activities and outcomes have a sustainable influence, or rather a long-lasting influence in our lives. So like Caroline said this morning, we expect that to have ideally a deep and personal sense of change. So my day-to-day role is very data-driven. I look at performance, I look at targets, and something I heard recently, and I use that as part of my day-to-day inspiration, is I'm there to assess progress on knowledge, skills, values, behaviors, and attitudes. So the Lullaby Project, and something that I was extremely proud to be a part of, it gave me an absolute sense of hope, and I've seen that in prisoners for the first time, and a level of hope and sense of pride that I've never seen before. And I've worked with so many different projects and programs, but that was a very special one. Suddenly I saw prisoners really wanting to demonstrate that they've changed, and they're proud to do something, and that links to them being, links to their children, and the impact they want to have into their children, and that sense of satisfaction that came out of that project. And that followed by their attitudes after the program. I've seen prisoners really wanting to engage and using that experience to propel them further and do more when it comes to any other subjects or programs of learning, straight after the Lullaby Project. And also, in terms of behaviors, I also felt that we, as a prison, we also were extremely proud to host that event. We talked about an example of only a member of staff turned up to an event, but it was an accident. But when it came to the Lullaby Project at HMP Norwich, Zari will be able to confirm that we had every single member of the SMT at that final show. We had officers, we had people from OMU, everyone turned up. Everyone wanted to see the final show because it took a very long time to get to that phase. I still remember the hurdles I had to go through. Because going back to prisons being a very complex environment, you have to reassure a lot of people. You need to give them that assurance that this is not going to let you down. This is not going to put us in a bad place. So we had to speak with security. We had to identify the right prisoners to take part. And what I really liked was that I consulted with an agency that specialized with families. As part of their role, they work with prisoners that have children, and they create those links with the children. So as part of their roles, they know which prisoners have children and have a good relationship with their kids. So why would I be identifying prisoners when I know that there's an agency that knows our prisoners really well? So I just went straight to them and asked, do you have any names that we could consider for this particular project? This is the project, it's about Lullaby. It's very similar to a project that we call, you probably may have heard of it, called Storybook Dads. But this is almost like Storybook Dads on steroids. It's much better. And they said, yes, we have a list of names, and I personally contacted every single prisoner, and I wanted it to be a very diverse and mixed group. I remember there was this particular Polish lad who said, oh, Z, I can't do it, my English, I definitely won't be able to do it. And I said, can you just try, just give it a go. And luckily enough he accepted and he did it, and it worked really well. So every single prisoner was handpicked by an agency, and I contacted them, and it's just interesting to see when you go from all those complexities, competing pressures where security is the ultimate goal and we cannot let prison fail, to reassuring those people and making payments and all the finance involved to actually enabling professionals to come in and do their work, and then you see that impact, amazing impact in the lives of our prisoners. And I think that's pretty much what I can share with you today. And it sounds very simple, and I still, really enjoy going through those challenges and finding ways to enable professionals to come in and do their roles and have some form of impact in the lives of our prisoners. Thank you.
As we all know, programs based on the arts, at least in the English-speaking world, have expanded in terms of numbers over recent years. Almost in parallel with this development, we have seen a rise in the number of evaluations that are being conducted in relation to arts-based programs. And on the surface, of course, this is a welcome development, at least if you believe that policy should be based on evidence. Such evaluations should inform policy in terms of what works, what does not, and so on. However, it seems to me that the rise in the number of evaluations has not necessarily been accompanied by a rise in the quality of evaluations. So I would like to say a few things about what I feel distinguishes this particular evaluation from the overwhelming majority of evaluations that have been conducted in this field. To begin with, the very fact that this evaluation combines different methods, qualitative as well as quantitative, is really important in terms of capturing the different effects that such programs may have, but also, equally importantly, and I will come back to this in a moment, in terms of better appreciating the precise operations through which those programs produce certain outcomes. There is also a more strategic, a more political, if you want, benefit to employing quantitative methods alongside qualitative methods. And this is that, whether we like it or not, we live in a managerialist world where hard-nosed, empirical, quantitative research is being privileged. So to the extent that one manages to combine qualitative components in one's evaluation with quantitative, one is in a better position to appeal to policymakers. So there is something to be said about this as well. Equally, in this regard, and this is another strong element of this particular evaluation, equally important is the fact that it has employed a quasi-experimental approach. In other words, that it has included in the evaluation a control group. I will come back to this later on. Perhaps the most impressive aspect of this research project has been its focus on the array of actors involved in the delivery of the programs. Practitioners, prison staff, and prison staff at different levels. I cannot recall a single evaluation in this field that has looked in such details at the wide array of actors who are involved and whose contributions are important, either in terms of promoting positive outcomes or indeed in terms of hindering positive outcomes. So we have heard a lot about the role that prison staff plays in the delivery of those programs. In prior literature, prison staff has often been identified as having played a hindering, as having had a negative role in terms of actively discouraging prisoners from participating in arts-based programs. On the basis of what we've heard today so far, here we have findings that present where prison staff are either passively discouraging participation insofar as they fail to show up. Maybe this was not their intention, but they fail to show up. But we also have examples of prison staff who do value the importance of the arts and actively contribute to the successful delivery of programs. So I really welcome this multifaceted approach that this evaluation has adopted, and the findings are really fascinating in this regard. At the very beginning of today's conference, we heard that one of the broader goals of the project has been to contribute to a collective evidence base. This, of course, is a very positive ambition. It's an endeavor that is to be welcomed. I don't think anyone would disagree in this room, of course. It is a difficult one. It requires consistency in the methodological quality of the different studies that have been adopted, if at least a collective evidence base is to be convincing to key actors in the field of criminal justice. I don't think we are there yet, but I do very much hope that this project will be taken up as a good example to be followed in the future by others. In the meantime, and that's one key question that has already been posed, and different speakers have already touched on this, how do we disseminate effectively findings that have been reached by good evaluations such as this one? An important factor to take into account here is that we are talking about different audiences. We want to disseminate, but to whom do we want to disseminate? So there are different audiences to reach. We have already heard very correctly, Pia gave a wonderful commentary earlier referring to policymakers. There is also another audience, prison staff. There is, of course, the broader public. And within in fact, we shouldn't be talking about the general public as if the public is a coherent whole. There are different publics that one might want to reach. To the extent that there is a plurality of audiences to whom one would want to disseminate findings, perhaps we should think about employing different languages according to each audience. Perhaps we should think about disseminating different findings. Some audiences, for example, may be much more interested in hearing what a particular program has achieved or failed to achieve with regard to reducing the offending rates. Another audience, well, that would be the policymakers, obviously. Another audience would be more interested in the extent to which a particular program promotes the well-being of participants, and so on. A very important factor to also consider in this regard, in terms of effective dissemination of findings, is who is disseminating the findings. What is the social capital of the disseminator of findings, and who is best placed in order to appeal to different audiences? There is some research here, by the way, that has sought to address this question in relation to humanitarian action. So who is the most suitable communicator who will appeal to different segments of the public and encourage them to participate in humanitarian action? We often hear, I'm not suggesting this has been proposed by anyone here, but I would like to mention it. I think it will be of interest. There is a theory, and it's also a practice, as you will know, that celebrities are often invited to participate in the dissemination of research that is well-intentioned and tries to attract to encourage positive action, humanitarian action in this regard. The problem with this approach is that often, as it has been shown in research in the field of media and communications, often the problem with this approach is that it is celebrities who attract the attention rather than the actual research, and this diversion of attention doesn't serve the purposes it was supposed to. Anyway, it is crucial, I think, in the process of disseminating findings to be realistic about programs based on the arts, realistic as to what such programs can achieve. Of course, we all know that there is a lot of focus on the part of governments on reducing recidivism rates, but realistically speaking, such programs are unlikely, at least on their own, to promote desistance from crime on a long-term basis. So I think it would be prudent to avoid focusing on recidivism and as this project has done, to rather emphasize other indicators such as well-being. Otherwise, one runs the risk of setting up arts-based programs for failure. And it is equally important, and here I very much endorse what Kirsten said in her brilliant commentary. It is very important to avoid perpetuating the idea that the criminal justice system, and particularly the prison system, is a system that cares. The very fact that we may discover positive findings in the context of the criminal justice system in relation to a particular program doesn't mean that the system as a whole is a system of care. I would like to finish just a few seconds, if I may, by posing a couple of questions to the research team. It was already touched upon earlier on in this session that different art forms and perhaps different modes of delivery of such programs may have different effects. So I would personally like to hear a bit more about this. And finally, as I said earlier, it is very important that you employed a comparison group, in other words, that you employed a quasi-experimental design. I would like to hear a bit more about the process of matching the two groups to the extent that that is possible. But a related question for me is the following. I noticed that in some of your quantitative findings, the comparison group was doing also quite well in terms of positive outcomes. And I was wondering whether within your comparison group or your control group there were artists, because obviously you looked at participants in a structured program based on the arts, but this doesn't mean that the rest of the population that you studied did not engage with the arts, but perhaps in a different, less structured way, where at the end of the day one might be freer to express themselves. Anyway, thank you very much.